Hello and welcome to the Deep Track Podcast, an exploration of watches, trends, and culture with a few adventures along the way. I'm your host, Blake Better. This week, we welcome guest James Thompson, who you may know better as Black Badger online. James is an industrial designer who's done some pretty incredible work collaborating with watch brands from DeBethune and MB&F to Arcanaut and George Bamford and many others. He is currently at work at Arcanaut watches, bringing watches like the Arc II Fordite to life, using his expertise in materials, using materials, well, like Fordite. Fordite has a really incredible story to it, and this is something that we get into, and he explains in a bit more clarity than I'm certainly able to do about how he uses this, how he discovered it, what it's like to work with, and what makes it so special when it comes to life on these watches. James has a very interesting background, and we get a little bit into that here in this episode and talk about his thoughts on some other watches, other watch brands that he's paying attention to, and some of his other experiences that lend to his unique stylistic approach to watches and materials. Without further ado, let's jump into this week's episode with James Thompson. All right, James Thompson, aka the Black Badger, thanks so much for joining me today on the Deep Track Podcast.
How are you, man? It's nice to see you again.
It's nice to see you as well. We were just together over in, where was that? Dubai? Over in the Middle East?
Yeah. I'm trying to remember when was the last time I saw you. It would have been Dubai Watch Week.
Yes. James is a good friend who you may know or be more familiar with as Black Badger. He's been called many things. If you Google his name, like King of Loom, and
I've been called many things.
You've been called many things, and there are some of the more flattering things, of course, over on the chemist of the watch world, things like this. So, James, I appreciate you joining me today. For people who aren't familiar with you, maybe you just give us like a brief intro of who you are and what you do.
I have been called the Forrest Gump of the watch industry, and when someone first said that, I was really kind of irked by it, but now I'm like, actually, you know what? That's kind of cool. I'm the Forrest Gump of the watch industry. I kind of show up at the right place at the right time and end up pulling some pretty cool projects out of thin air, or whatever you want to call it. I'm just kidding. Starting off, I'm making a fool of myself. I'm an industrial designer by education. I tend to work more from a materials forward standpoint. So instead of just coming up with cool shapes and forms, what I get really excited about in design is implementation of new and sort of exotic materials and such. That's really kind of the broad strokes of it. And I end up finding myself in all sorts of really weird and wonderful situations where I think being adaptable is probably the most important skill set.
Yeah.
Just being able to say, yep, I can do that. And then in the elevator down, you're going, oh God, oh God, oh God. I need to learn how to shoot a bow and arrow while riding a horse, or I need to learn how to land a helicopter while speaking French or something.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
It's terrifying, but it's great fun.
Yeah, it always ends up with some really cool projects, collaborations, and not just in watches. Of course, you I'd say quite prolific in the things that you've been able to touch over over your time in doing this, which we'll get into some of that as well.
Yeah.
All right. So we usually start these things off with a wrist check. What are you wearing today, James?
I am wearing, oddly enough, an Arcanaut. Arcanaut is a Copenhagen, Denmark-based micro indie brand. I guess I'm never sure how you even classify these things. I'm sure Rob will scream at me about it. Micro indie watch brand based out of Denmark that I've been a part of for about 3 or 4 years now. And what we do is try and put a bit of entertainment back into this hobby. And we don't take ourselves massively seriously. And we just really try and be as experimental as possible. I think being experimental from the outset is really fun, but actually staying experimental after a couple of years that's really where the magic is. So what I'm wearing now is it's one of our Fordite series. Fordite is something that features really heavily, both at Arcanaut and my own sort of jewelry design work that I was doing previously with Black Badger. Fordite's car paint. It's the car paint that builds up on the walls and work surfaces of industrial car factories. So we've been working with this. My first Fordite watch actually was something I did with our good mutual friend, Mr. George Bamford, about 2019. And we've I've developed the skill set through this material enough that we can actually say we're probably on the third generation of Fordite now, where we actually start to destroy it. So, you have to learn the rules in order to break them. I think Audemars Piguet has that as their mantra or something.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what we're doing now. So with this watch, it's a Fordite car paint dial, but it's a brand new method called ripple milling. And ripple milling is, the long and short of it is, we take a beautifully polished, finished Fordite watch dial with all the colors and all these sort of striations. And then we actually CNC mill a gentle topographical wave pattern into the material. And what that does, it's like if you take a piece of wood and you sand it at an angle as compared to cutting it straight across the grain. Every little bit of variation you put into the physical shape is affected and sort of celebrated by the grain. So with this, these were pencil straight lines in the one that I have on. And by ripple milling it, it just looks like sort of Willie Nelson's Last Drunken Nightmare kind of psychedelic. It's got a real sort of, for me, this one has a real sort of southwest USA kind of color palette to it. Very sort of New Mexico, Arizona kind of vibe to it.
Well, it turned out
So this
beautifully.
is something that's just come out, I think, today, as a matter of fact.
Yep, as we
we've just
record
sort of
this.
gone public with this ripple mill today. And we've got a bunch of them over on our Arcanaut web shop, which we'll give you all the information for that. I don't want to shill it too badly. But so I am wearing the very first production model of the Fordite ripple mill.
Well, congratulations on the launch of the watch. It looks fantastic. The material itself is really interesting, and I remember seeing this for the first time. I don't know where we were, in Switzerland or at a wind-up or something like that. And this material is just kind of endlessly fascinating, and it's something that I was hoping to talk to you a little bit further about. Before we do, my wrist check, I'm wearing an Omega Seamaster Ploprof in titanium. We've got a
Is that why you're leaning off to the left in the picture?
Exactly. That's yep. So this it's more wearable than you might realize. And I was just having this conversation with somebody else. When you wear this watch, it's kind of a good reminder that a watch is more than a collection of the three measurements. That wearability kind of boils down to more factors than that. So we'll have a lot more, including a video on this watch coming soon. So keep an eye out for that. All right. So this Fordite, the ripple mill, I'm curious how you mentioned that you started working with this material with George Bamford on a collaboration, and you've since kind of brought it into these new watches from Arcanaut. How did you discover this material? And like A, that it existed, and then B, that you could work with it or do something with it. What was that process like?
In the interest of pure theatrics, my discovery of Fordite happened over a very expensive bottle of wine in a very odd subterranean apartment in Paris one fine afternoon visiting a friend. My very dear friend Alberto, who works in the watch industry and such, and is a big collector of all things artistic. My wife and I were in Paris, and we were staying with them for a couple of nights. And he's this unbelievable cook. And he pulls out a bottle of Sauterne from 1943 or something that we had with lunch that was just unbelievable. Wow. And we're talking about all the goofy materials that were out there, because this was about 2013, 14, maybe somewhere around there, when I was doing piles of work with carbon fiber and all the sort of solid loom materials like we would then use with MB&F and some of these mega Sarpaneva projects that would come out shortly thereafter. And Alberto says to me, have you ever thought about Fordite? And I go, what the hell's Fordite? And he rummages around in like the drawer under the phone that everybody has in their house. And he pulls out this little keychain ball and starts explaining what it is. And it's car paint. It was a lump. It's the car paint that sort of drips off the edge of the workbench where they're painting all the cars. And because the entire system goes through the ovens, the hardening, the curing and all this, the actual work table itself ends up just having these giant stalactite style formations on it of just thousands of layers of car paint. And after a while, you need to knock these off with a hammer because then, you don't have any workspace left. And I just thought this was just the coolest thing I'd ever heard of. So he gave me a little 1 centimeter cube of this Fordite stuff that he had just to kind of bugger around with. And I had never, the fact that I didn't know this stuff existed, I thought was really cool because I thought I was pretty dialed in on things and clearly I wasn't. And that little 1 centimeter cube ended up becoming a ring for, I think she was like the marketing director of Oakley or something. So it ended up that somebody was wearing this Fordite ring at the super cool, iconic Oakley head office in California. So I thought I was really proud of this. And I just really kind of leaned into it after that because it had been used since like the 60s in a lot of quite hippie sort of style jewelry, giant dangly earrings and bracelets and this kind of stuff. But it didn't really feel like anybody had really sort of explored the material and sort of trying to figure out what makes it tick. So I found a place in the United States that basically brokers this stuff. Because for what I wanted it to do, it needed to come from quite a specific time frame.
Okay.
About the 70s to the 90s in the United States was chemically when this stuff was the best. After that, they started switching to more environmentally friendly car paint. So that made it a little greener, a little better for the environment, but it also made it softer, so it didn't really do what I wanted it to do. The old shit, like this stuff was so full of solvents and all this kind of stuff, and it goes through the oven that it comes out and it's like an agate. You could, it's almost like working with like a snooker ball. It's just dead solid.
Yeah.
So it kind of came to it from there, and then just having this weird little arrow in my quiver. I was over speaking with George Bamford when we first started kicking around what we could do together. And I had this, like a Pelican case. It's just got all these weird material samples for all these different things that I had worked with. Chunk of a meteorite, a bolt from the stealth bomber, whatever kind of stuff. And a little piece of this Fordite. And we're just throwing all these pieces back and forth across the table. And I kind of arbitrarily chucked this ring that I had made over to George. And he kind of goes, "The hell's this?" And I go, "Fordite." "Oh, you haven't heard of it?"
Yeah.
Subtle wink.
Yeah.
So I got to sort of tell the story of this material, and he just got crazy excited about it. So that became our first big collaboration together. So I would kind of say that was generation 1 of Fordite.
Yeah.
Which is we cut the pieces, and I had absolutely no input or control as to what we were going to get. When the dial was the right thickness, you stop sanding it, and that's what you get. And it was this really kind of art student-y way of looking at it because it was like accidental discovery and all this. And it made some really exciting pieces. What we're doing then when the Arcanaut Fordite project came out, and we've done 40 or 50 pieces now that we've sold probably at least, I would call that generation 2, which means we understand the material to the point that we can, almost like somebody that works with gems, can pick up the hunk of rock and look inside and kind of figure out what's going to come from where.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where we're at with Fordite. You can look at different surface characteristics. You can look at the cross section. You can look at the time frame and kind of arrogantly pretend you know what's going on inside. So that's Gen 2. What we're stepping into now is Generation 3 with the Ripple Mill, which is, like we said before, we understand the material enough that we can start to kind of beat the shit out of it a little bit.
Yeah.
And it's really exciting and it's really terrifying because this stuff is expensive as sin. And basically you make a finished dial and then you're like, okay, let's chew it up and see what it looks like. And yeah, you gotta be brave to do that.
And this is
it's really exciting.
And this is a finite material, of course. So you mentioned the specific era that it was from, and then not all of it comes out in aesthetically pleasing manners, from what I understand. So you'll have periods where you're sanding and polishing where you could potentially go too far and then lose the pattern that you were going for, or like how do you know when you've hit it?
This just happened day before yesterday. When I buy the Fordite for my guy, you get these sort of slabs of it, and they're usually, like say about the size of a phone book,
Mm.
and for a piece about the size of the phone book, you're spending thousands and thousands of dollars on this stuff. And usually you're looking at the cross section because there'll be some really neat little color transition. It'll be a bunch of blue layers, and then right in the middle there'll be this twisty little dragon tail of red that goes through. You're like, oh, that's what I want.
Mm.
With this specific piece that I had, the outer surface on the bottom, the exposed surface, was this gorgeous teal blue. Now, you don't see a lot of cars driving down the street that color, so this was something really rare. And what I found with this piece, purely by accident, I completely Forrest Gumped it, was I got started to prep some material for a dial, and I kid you not, 15 seconds of wet sanding on the bottom, and all those high points on this beautiful teal blue just kissed off a tiny bit, and it was bright yellow, black, gray, silver layers underneath. So after like 20 seconds of sanding, it looked exactly like looking down on an island chain. Beautiful teal blue with this yellow, black little topographical island in it. And I just stopped and I went, I cannot lose this.
Yeah.
So I had to sort of stop and then reinvent the entire process from the ground up to how to get this color, this chunk out of an inch thick piece, how to get that onto a finished watch without effing up this final result that I already had.
Yeah.
Literally, it's like writing the last page of a book and then going, okay, now I got to figure out how I got there. And by the grace of God, I managed to get 3 dials out of the exact same series together.
Oh, wow.
The series we called the Oasis.
Wow.
One of our clients actually took all 3 of them.
Oh, no kidding.
And it's one of the most satisfying things I've ever done artistically, because it just looks, between you and me, it makes it look like I really know what I'm doing and that I didn't just fall ass backwards into this.
Sure.
It's
but there's a little bit of that.
I'll send you some pictures. It's dead cool. Yeah.
So obviously each one of these is very unique and different and has its own kind of personality, and this can be shifted quite a bit. And then the Ripple Mill kind of adds another dimension to this entirely, which is really incredible, and the depth that comes through. So it's actual depth. Like if you ran your finger across it, you would feel the difference. It's not just a visual trick.
Well, that's what was unique with this little Oasis miniseries, accidental miniseries that I talked about, is usually they are glass flat. I've got the dial mounted into this little kind of aluminum hockey puck. Canadian, I got to mention hockey. This little sort of hockey puck jig holder that I use for sanding them, because obviously they have to be dead flat and parallel and all this, otherwise the watch won't work. Mm-hmm. But with this one, because it actually had topography to it, it actually had, think of it as like inverted bubbles in the material. So as you started to sand off the high points, all that beautiful ocean color was in these sort of gloop bubbles.
Yeah.
So those dials actually aren't flat. They've actually got up and down to them. I'm guessing it's going to give our watchmaker a nervous breakdown. But
yeah. Well, the result is really beautiful. And is this a limited edition series, or how many of these can you make?
Of which? Of the Oasis ones?
Yeah, I guess of any of these, right?
The whole point of Fordite is that every single one is different and every single one is unique. So kind of by pure dumb luck, we managed to get, I forget if it's 3 or 4 that really look the same. And they were all cut out of the same piece at the same time, which actually adds an extra little bit of kind of poetry to it.
Yeah. Because
this material is made from car overspray while cars are being painted. So you could look at it as, if you have a watch dial made of the exact same layer of blue as mine is, it was probably the same damn car. And that's kind of cool. Yeah. And this is, usually stuff that came from a Ford factory in like 1985. So we're not talking about Porsches or Maseratis. We're talking about fucking Ford delivery vans or something.
Yeah.
But it sort of makes a nice, it does add a bit of poetry to a very synthetic material. So
Yeah.
I quite like that. And I like when you do get to make something purely for the fact just that it's a little beautiful. It doesn't need to be any performance characteristics, or it doesn't make the watch work any better.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
just makes it makes you smile. A steak dinner and a Negroni just makes you smile, and that's all it needs to do. And
Yeah.
does what it
Yeah.
says on the box, man.
Yeah, that's this watch is the steak dinner Negroni of watches. So in terms of you've worked with a
Purely.
lot of really crazy materials, James, over the years. Where does this kind of fall into? Where does this rank in terms of how difficult it is to work with compared to
Oh, it's horrible.
titaniums and
It's
carbon
horrible.
fibers and that kind of stuff.
Like, it's such a self-imposed hell, man. Because like outside of Arcanaut, when I'm doing like the jewelry design stuff, like if I'm just milling a ring out of titanium for somebody, that's just easy peasy, because titanium is a homogeneous metal. It's titanium on this end and it's titanium on that end.
Mm-hmm.
If you're trying to mill something out of a 50-year-old year of car paint and you're trying to bond it to a piece of 70,000-year-old woolly mammoth tooth, I mean, what the hell do you expect? You don't expect it to go well.
Yeah. Yeah.
These aren't materials that were ever meant to be used in any kind of a industrial process. They were never meant to be elevated to the point of a jewelry piece or a watch component. So it's a self-imposed hell, and I absolutely love it. The day that you see me making a really nice, sensible gold watch, just give me two in the head, buddy. I won't be mad
He's
at you.
lost
I
it.
won't haunt you or anything.
He's lost
I've
it.
lost it. Jimmy T has sold out, and it's time to
Yeah.
go.
Yeah. So
No,
it's taking.
it's incredibly difficult to work with because it is just car paint.
Yeah.
And it's car paint that was a waste material. People would throw this stuff away for years and years and years.
Yeah.
So you'll be making something. I just had this happen on a dial I was finishing yesterday. Keep your eye on the website. New dial's coming. I was completely finished with it. It was just, I loved it. And I was looking at it under the microscope. Don't ever look at Fordite under a microscope, because all you'll see is tiny little inclusions, little micro bubbles, an eyelash from 1978,
Yeah.
tape. There's always masking tape in the middle of something, and you
Oh,
find it
really?
and just go, because you got to get a pin out and sort of dig it out and then try and infill it so you can't see it. And it just,
Yeah. Yeah.
it was never meant to be used like this. So it likes to fail epically at the worst time.
Yeah. Well, that lends to the beauty of it overall, though. I think. So taking a step back, you mentioned that you're an industrial designer. You have a really interesting background, and I want to ask you about even going way back, 2010. I think you were in South Austria, designing submarines.
Australia.
That's what it was. Okay.
Don't blow my cover.
So
Yeah. This.
Yeah. So how did this come about? And I want to go from here to how you got into the watch world.
Well, actually, there is a clear delineation. I'm running on coffee here, buddy. So in 2010, when I was getting ready to do my industrial design master's degree thesis project, I was working with a really, really dear friend of mine, Matthias Sjöberg, at our design school here in Sweden. And what we were thinking about doing, one of our project proposals, was we wanted to do a redesign of the Omega Speedmaster, but in focus of, at the time, they were talking about doing Mars missions. This is like 2009.
Yeah.
And because we didn't want to do just a pure product design, because it needed to be in the realm of a master's thesis, all the research and all this kind of stuff. So we started looking at what would a timepiece look like if you're not on Earth. So the 24-hour clock makes no effing sense the minute that you step off of the Earth. Earth rotates once, 24 hours. I get it. If you're on a 3, 5, 6, 7-year mission to Mars, who the hell cares if it's 8:15 in the morning in Singapore? It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
So all the weird research side of stuff. So we presented the project to a lady who I had kept in touch with, more name dropping here, from NASA. She was a Chalmers University, which is the technical school at University of Gothenburg here. And she's quite closely associated with NASA. and the International Space Station design specifically. And I kept in touch with her from some other stuff. So we presented this project to her saying, we're going to make a space watch. And she goes, yeah, okay, cool. I like that. But I've got this other project here that I need some students for. And she slides a business card across the table. And I remember the first thing I noticed, because it was like first week of January and like minus 15 and snowing in Gothenburg. And I just saw it said Adelaide, South Australia on the bottom. And I went, oh shit, I want this so badly. And it was a company called Deep Blue Tech that does the advanced R&D specifically for submarines for the Royal Australian Navy. And they were getting ready to do a whole bunch of retrofitting and redesigns on them. And the connection was most of the Australian Navy submarines, what they call a Collins class submarine, is a modified Swedish Gotland class submarine.
Okay. With
the addition of a Stirling air-independent propulsion system. Boom, that's all I can tell you.
Okay. Well, I mean, I would have guessed
the
that.
Australian Navy submarines were built in Sweden, like the main unit.
Yeah.
So we sort of got to go to this, go and spend 2.5, 3 months on a secure Navy base in Adelaide, and got to show your passport to the armed guards and stuff every morning, and sitting in the cafeteria next to the guy that makes torpedoes and all this kind of weird shit. But specifically, we weren't working with bombs and guns and weapons and crap. We needed to sort of have more theory to the project. So we worked with personal space and privacy issues. On board was specifically extreme environment habitation design. Okay. And you can imagine the ribbing that we got, because first of all, see if you get any angry letters over this. Australians are a pretty aggro bunch. The dudes are dudes. We eat beef. And especially on a military base, that gets ramped up even more. So these were all real manly men wrestling crocodiles and such.
Sure.
And they bring in these two dudes. We were the only two designers out of about 150 naval engineers and naval architects and engineers in this company. So the ribbing that we got from these guys from day one, like, oh, what color are the pillows going to be? Oh, you guys designing the curtains and all. Oh, Jesus Christ. But it was really, really cool, because we worked with, how do you make people feel better? If you feel better, you perform better. If you perform better, I perform better. If we perform better, the boat performs better. And this theory that we were cooking up could be applied to any extreme environment habitation design, like an offshore oil well, like an Antarctic research base, like potential Mars colonization, or whatever you want to call it, kind of things. So it ended up being unbelievably interesting. Mostly it's the coolest anecdote for a cocktail party you can possibly drop out there.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Like, oh, yeah, I designed submarines, and I came back and I was goofing around with McLaren for a while, and then I was fighting ninjas in space.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And it's all bullshit.
Is there anything that you carry with you from that few month period, though, that has affected how you think about even things like jewelry and watches?
Yes, absolutely is. One of the main driving theories that we cooked up over the course of this project was something called negative legacy inheritance, which is, oh, how come that wall is made of folded metal and has a big sharp corner on it? And they would say, well, I don't know, it's always been like that. And we say, well, what if that corner could be rounded so you don't keep hitting your head on it? And they go, after 2 or 3 times, you don't really care anymore. So it's like,
naturally,
it was so infuriating, because the biggest obstacle that we had was the damn users. The people were so industrious and so tough and so let's get her done, that we're like, hey, maybe your chair can be comfortable so you don't have crippling back pain. But we're tough. We're submariners. So, if you want a soft chair, stay home. and that actually can be applied to really any number of product design, especially when it comes to branding and such. You could almost abstract it and look at, well, when does a Mercedes start to look too much like a BMW? And there's all these sort of visual cues and shapes and forms and different ways of working and such.
Yeah.
That you find actually the history of the brand, the history of the product can have physical weight to it, which is definitely something that I found in some of the collaborations that I did.
Yeah.
You find the history of the brand actually starts fighting back, and it sucks.
Yeah.
But at the same time, if your job is to kind of shake them up a little bit, you need to poke the bear.
Yeah, I like the idea.
Was that at all the answer you're looking for, or did I go off on a 20-minute
No, that's
TED talk?
That's very interesting. That's exactly the kind of thing that I love to hear, and asking why about things that a lot of people just kind of take for granted and maybe don't really think too much about. It's easy to fall into this, well, that's just always how we've done things, or that's just the way that it is. So you don't challenge any of that, right? So you just kind of keep building on compromises every time instead of like cutting back to the base. And a lot of the brands that you work
and it
with
definitely becomes an obsession.
Yeah.
You find once you've been off the edge of the map for long enough, you're like, oh, maps are for losers. And you're just wandering around in the dark.
Yeah.
And it's pretty cool, but
yeah,
who wants to work with that guy?
Yeah.
Who wants to share an office with that?
But thankfully, like, look at some of the brands that you've worked with, who aren't afraid to kind of challenge some of those base assumptions, like DeBethune and MB&F, like, and even Arcanaut. These are kind of challenging conventional wisdom in a way. So, and you've worked with some of my favorite watch brands of the big independent scene, micro independent scene. Like what has the experience been like in working with some of the minds behind these kinds of brands?
Oh, good Lord. Educational. I think the very first time I met Max Busser, like we all do, I think I was trying to impress one of my heroes. So we're sitting down. I think I was sort of trying to paint myself as like the champion of independence. So I sort of started spouting off something about how much Rolex sucks. Rolex sucks.
Sure.
And he very politely sat me down and spent 40 minutes telling me, well, no, and here's why.
Yeah.
And I just sat there, like a kid whose mom had caught him swearing in church or something. I'm like, okay, yes, sir. Oh, okay, yeah, yes, sir. Say 3 Hail Maxes. And
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
It's interesting because kind of like this negative legacy inheritance with a lot of these brands, at the end of the day, a Porsche needs to look like a Porsche. If you put a Lamborghini spoiler on a Mercedes, you're going to die poor and alone. Everyone's going to look at you like you're an idiot.
Yeah.
Which is where Arcanaut has been really quite rewarding for me, is that I don't feel like I need to bend myself to fit into an established brand.
Yeah.
I think if I would have shacked up with these guys 5 years ago, 10 years ago, I definitely wouldn't have the same, obviously not the same experience level, but I think having done some of these projects with very heavy companies, I mean, good Lord, DeBethune returning your emails. I mean, you can almost hear those emails land and boom. Oh man, they know I'm alive. Oh God, I'm so scared.
Yep.
And walking into their factory or sitting down having dinner with Denis Flageolet and his wife or something. You're like, what the fuck am I doing here? They're going to know that I'm an idiot. I shouldn't be here.
The jig's up here.
Whereas, yeah, exactly. Oh no, he's going to fight me. Well, no, but I think what came from the submarine project and what kind of telemarked to these really big established brands is I am 100% comfortable being a fish out of water. And if I may quote the greatest movie of all time, which is Step Brothers, you can bleep this if you want, we're here to fuck shit up.
Yeah.
That should be my business card.
Yeah.
If you're a company that makes really beautiful, elegant, stainless steel dive watches, don't call me, because I'm not going to give you a beautiful, elegant stainless steel dive watch. There's people that can do that and do it fantastically.
Yeah, there's plenty of great ones out there.
I don't, yeah. And I'll buy them. I like them. But as far as what I get excited about, like if I'm not excited about your project, it's just not going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And whether that's just me being kind of a diva, I guess. But what people relate to is me bouncing off the walls, jumping around the room, being excited about making a watch out of blue mussel shells. or these kinds of things that I'm subjecting Anders and Rob and the guys at Arcanaut to.
Well, I think there's something to be said for a lot of watch brands. Maybe there's not enough risks being taken these days in the watch industry. So you see a lot of young, creative, small micro brands, whatever they want to call themselves, coming up and being, really incredibly creative and putting, some of their ideas into work and bringing them to life with, exotic materials and things that have generally been associated with kind of like the upper crust levels of watches. So I feel like we're at a state, though, that has come far enough that a lot of the kind of mainstay watch brands are starting to pay attention to this space, because a lot of serious enthusiasts, whatever that means, and collectors, are spending a lot of time and money and attention to brands like Arcanaut or Formex or what Bamford is doing or whatever it is.
Being at Windup where I met you and having Arcanaut on the collective table is a massive coup in itself, and it's such a benefit too, because of course it legitimizes us. We can still be goofy and still be crazy and still be bouncing off the walls, but at the end of the day, if you give us your money, we will give you a watch. There needs to be that. Otherwise, we're just goofy. And I think a lot of these young hyper creatives that you were talking about, second studio underdog, these guys are fucking amazing. And what makes it extra hard, what they're doing, is they're artists. They're apeshit crazy artists. But at the end of the day, they can deliver a physical product. And that's a massive difference from just running around goofy, spray painting fun colors on things. So that's where it's really hard for these young hyper creatives, is that at the same time they're being judged by people that might have a really nice, sensible collection of Seiko dive watches or something like we all have. So whenever these guys put out a new collaboration, I'm stupid enough that I do read the comments on things. I know I shouldn't. And people just say, like, oh, why would I buy this crap? Oh, this is stupid. Oh, I can get 7, and they start listing off all the watches they could buy instead. And it's like, well, go do that. It's not like I go on the Mercedes forum and say, I've decided not to buy your car this year.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks for letting us know.
You know how many Civics I could buy for the price of this E-Class?
Yeah, exactly. And it's not like Honda's going to go, fuck yeah.
Yeah.
So I think having groups like Collective, the entire Red Bar community, God bless them. Because I think it started out as a bunch of goofballs getting drunk and showing their watches. But it grew up to the point where it's like, this is absolute demographic gold. Because you've taken all your clients and you put them in a box and you liquor them up and they tell you what they want. Think of this, pre-Instagram. How the hell would this have worked? You'd be putting personal ads in the New York Times or something, which is usually what you do if you want to get abducted or something. So it's exciting, it's exhausting, and it works. That's kind of the best part.
Well, big shout out to our friends Asher and Gabe at Collective, and of course Adam Craniotis over at Red Bar, all doing really awesome stuff.
Yes,
there, and Kathleen. Looking back at kind of the watch industry as a whole, are there other brands that you pay attention to that you're really enthusiastic about, that you get really excited about what they're doing? And how does that reflect in your own watch collection?
Yeah, and it's such a range. I like what I like, and I think it's important that that's not the same watches that, say, Anders Brandt, Arcanaut co-owner and founder. It's probably not the same watches that he likes. And I think if we all just run around holding a giant flashing MB&F sign over our heads, which most of us do, it'd be like, okay, well then we're going to get something that's kind of a watered down, safer version of that. So I think the fact that it's, I think Övök is still the coolest cats in the cave. They're just, I just want to be them so much. Like it's almost sick how much I want to be those guys because they are still making a mess. They are still, knocking things over and fire and smoke everywhere and coming up with this unbelievably cool, legit product.
Yeah.
And I don't know who I would compare that to, like, say, in the car industry. Who would be the Överk of the car industry? Maybe Lamborghini, I don't know. But people, if someone drives by in a bright yellow Lamborghini, they go, well, okay, he's a Coke dealer.
Sure.
Somebody rolls up their sleeve and shows a really cool Överk. They go, oh, damn, tell me about that. Oh, that's cool.
What is that? Yeah, absolutely.
So who knows?
And shout out to Martin Fry of Urwork and of course Felix. Martin is a guy that I've talked about before.
Yeah.
He's a great follow on Instagram. Who's kind of always showing what is inspiring him visually, and we'll do our best to get him onto the podcast.
No, but
here
actually,
soon.
for that exact reason, Martin is one of my favorite people to follow on Instagram, because I followed him because I just wanted to see all the cool behind the scenes shit of their watches.
Yeah.
That's it. And instead it's like, oh, he's in Zurich just walking around looking at exhaust vents.
Yeah.
Taking pictures of exhaust vents. And I'm like, that is the coolest thing ever. And you can actually look at the watches and go, okay. It's like there's something called GAC design in movie prop design, which is, if you wanted to make the hero of the movie opens up the cover of something and there's like a nuclear bomb inside. Thankfully, nobody really knows what a disassembled nuclear bomb looks like in real life. So they would take 4 old blenders, a lawnmower, and a pinball machine and put them all together and go, ooh. You put a counter on it and suddenly, shit, it's a nuclear bomb.
Yeah.
So sort of using everyday things, and by changing the context, you make them fantastic.
Yeah.
So when you see some of the display windows and such on an Överk, you're like, that's like an HVAC unit from the late 1970s in Eastern Switzerland or something.
Yeah, I love it.
And that's just infinitely cooler than someone just sitting down and drawing really cool shapes.
Yeah.
For me, I mean, I get really jazzed about that.
So are there any brands that you would really love to work with outside of Urwork, of course, or brands that you have kind of a wish list, or people that you're like, oh, I've got these really great ideas that I could bring to the table for this kind of watch or that kind of watch from these people?
You know what? I mean, earlier I did. Earlier I had my big 3, and my big 3, probably like most people, was MB&F, DeBethune, Överk. I've got 2 of the 3 under my belt, and I'm bloody proud about that. But I'm kind of looking at it different now. I don't look at it as I'm dying to work with this brand. I look at it more as like that friend of mine at Oakley who bought one of my rings. When I was in design school, all I wanted was a business card that said Oakley Design, James Thompson. Hell yeah. Sure. I don't have that. Yeah. But one of their marketing bosses is walking around that building wearing one of my rings.
Yeah.
Like, isn't that kind of cooler? Isn't that a little jazzier?
Oh, yeah.
So definitely the collaborations I like. I think they're exciting. It's a really good way to sort of keep the blood flowing and such. But I'm also kind of at a point where I don't really feel like I need them. If something really exciting comes up, sure. You don't want to sort of be seen as like the actor, and the film comes out, they're like, oh, okay, yeah, he just got divorced for the 4th time. That's why they made a 7th Expendables movie, or kind of whatever it is, sort of thing.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of closing ranks a little bit, and all the real crazy shit is all coming out of Arcanaut. I mean, the stuff that we have coming out that we've released in the last few months is bonkers. The creative energy coming out of these guys is something that I'm just massively proud of.
Yeah, they're in a really exciting spot right now. They're a really fun watch brand to pay attention to, and it feels like they're at, I don't know, maybe step 1 or 2, and you can just see kind of a bright future starting to unfold there in front of them. So what can people look forward to in the coming year or 2 with Arcanaut and with what you have in your plate?
Good Lord. Well, I mean, with Arcanaut, I'm actually going to get my phone and check the dates to make sure I get it right so I don't get yelled at. So we did a minor re-release of the Dark Matter series, which is still starting to deliver pretty soon. And the Dark Matter is kind of what keyed off a whole new kind of design ethos for us at Arcanaut. And this is reconstituting everyday materials. So what we call dark matter is slate stone from the fountain I can see from my window here that I broke off. And I shoved the broken pieces of slate through a espresso grinder, as you do. And we reconstituted this stone powder into dials. So it gives really boring, brittle, everyday stone, really kind of an exciting, super black cement, almost like MDF board kind of look to it. And it sucks up all the light. It's like a black hole. It's just dead cool. And that kind of got us thinking, well, what else can we do along that same kind of mindset? And that brought up something called the Hovender, which we released about a month or so ago. And the Hovender is blue mussel shells. So I originally thought that I could just stuff blue mussel shells through the grinder and boom, done in 10 minutes. There's your blue material. And what we found out is there's about an 1/8 of a millimeter layer in the shell that actually has the pigment. Everything else is just kind of black and brown and gray and kind of shitty.
Yeah.
So I actually had to take each individual shell and a Dremel and sculpt just this one specific little section while working next to a little shop vac that was gathering up all the dust. Hundreds of hand sculpted shells just to get enough of this powder that we could actually cast it and mill the dials from that. So we've just milled the dials, and crap, are they ever cool. Because I thought it was going to be blue. It's a blue mussel. Well, it's not. Once you get the actual pigment separate, it is the most elegant lilac orchid kind of purple that I've ever seen.
Wow. Okay.
And unlike everything else that I've ever done, it's really subtle and it's really elegant and it is just beautiful. And we've added no color to it. If the blue mussel shells would have given us a bit browner color, that's what it would be. But it just, nature was on our side for this, and it just gave us this gorgeous, gorgeous color. So the Arcanaut, the Hovender are going to start delivering about second quarter this year. We've just released something a couple of weeks ago called the Experimental Series, which is going to be more Q3 delivery, I believe. And again, we don't do anything half measures. We released the Bonehead and the Tiger Shark. The Bonehead gets its name because the dial is made from something called Duocell. Duocell is aerospace grade aluminum foam that you would usually find like as a stiffening material in like satellite arms and all this kind of really fighter jets.
Aluminum foam? Jeez, that sounds nuts.
Aluminum foam that's been infilled with resin to make it completely solid, and then backlit with a solid Lumicast subdial. And we looked at it, and I thought, this looks like this lattice work structure inside of bones. And you can actually look at it under a microscope, and it's got so many layers to it. It's like if you're looking into like a rose bush with a flashlight, and you can just see all the different branches coming and going from all directions.
Oh, man.
So that is going to be, I'm crazy excited about that one. That's the Bonehead. Then there's the Tiger Shark, which is going to be almost like a Damascus steel case. So I've used Damascus steel in my rings before, and it's basically a couple different alloys, paper thin layers of titanium or steel that you forge together and twist it and all this. And then usually you would apply an acid to the material, and it would eat away the metals at different rates. So you would get this really neat kind of wood grain effect from the two different alloys. With this, we're actually using titanium and zirconium metal. So what that means is instead of the acid, you would actually heat it glowing hot with a blowtorch when it's all done. Then all those layers come out. The zirc goes black, the tie goes dark gray, and then you bead blast the whole thing, and you get these really subtle, almost imperceptible little stripes like on a tiger shark.
Yeah.
If they were really, really, really stark, like a tiger, it wouldn't look as good. It would look kind of 90s and kind of cheesy. But because they're really, really subtle striping on it, it makes a very cool effect. And we have new hands that are going to be on those, new subdial. I believe even, I might be wrong in this, if we're actually going to be having a new movement coming out as well.
Really? Okay.
Don't quote me on that. I probably got it wrong.
Okay. We'll pencil that in.
And then add on top of that, the ripple mill that we just chucked out at you today.
Yeah.
I'm like James Brown of the watch industry, man.
Yeah, you've got a lot going there. Is this in? So you mentioned a new movement, and I was going to ask about are the Arcanaut watches? Is it something that you think we'll see grow into like different case designs, maybe complications, things like that, or do you kind of predominantly see it as like this is a great palette to to play with the materials and the colors that you want to?
Currently, yes.
Okay.
Currently, we look at the case as containing the madness. So we have an ape shit crazy dial. So we have a very Scandinavian, very sober case.
Yeah.
If we do something that's going to have an absolutely bonkers case, like maybe the Tiger Shark, then it's going to have a very clean dial. You wouldn't put a Fordite dial in a Damascus case, or it'll just look like
Yeah.
leopard skin pants on the wrong person. Just all
Yeah.
bad, all
Yeah.
bad, man.
Yeah.
We've talked about this quite a bit, about at what point of being insanely creative do you actually start to kind of water down your design language. So we're trying to be really careful about jumping onto different form language too early.
Mm-hmm.
You also don't want to run the risk. How do I say this without sounding like an asshole? What's a brand that has a really, really iconic form? Seven Friday.
Sure,
Everybody
yeah.
knows that square hockey puck kind of shape.
Yeah.
And you can sort of see with earlier on, a lot of the designs was like, okay, we'll do a blue one. Well, now we'll do an orange one. Now we'll do a green one. How about a purple one? And it's almost like your design department just becomes a coloring book.
Mm-hmm.
And at what point do you then say, okay, we've done enough manifestations of this shape. Let's shoot it in the head and sort of see what else we can come up with.
Yeah.
We're not at that point yet. Please tell me if you think we are.
Okay. No, not at all.
Well, I mean, can I turn it around? Like, what would you like to see coming from Arcanaut?
So I think that as interesting as the dials are, I also really enjoy the case structure and shape, how the strap integrates, the crown mechanism, all the little details of this watch that are maybe not the focal point. I think are also really interesting, and I think
Yeah.
there's something like really great there, like to continue building onto. Like there's I think there's a lot of room for like exploring some of these small things in really interesting ways. And then, I think like you said, it's really going to come down to like how it balances out with what you're doing in the dial.
Yeah.
It's itself there and making sure that it makes sense. But
I mean, we
like
don't
the case, the
always want to be
crown, I
doing
think are awesome.
endless Fordite dials. Sorry.
Yeah.
We don't always want to be doing these dials that just scream at you from across the room. So if we do start doing something that is a little more of a sober dial design, maybe the case, can have a couple of cocktails and start getting a little rowdy.
Yeah, let it tear down a bit.
For me, I think that's right. Get a little saucy. I think the case is the absolute perfect expression of my good friend Anders, because you've met him.
Mm-hmm.
It's so good. It's so purpose built to not get in the way, right? Like everything is done to make it clean and sort of not passive. That's not the right word, but architectural. Like if you look at Scandinavian architecture versus Italian or something, it's got a very specific purpose, and it is to fit into its environment, and everything has a purpose. And I think the fact that that's been translated into this case design as well, I would almost say by blind luck, it makes a perfect canvas for the goofy shit that I do.
Yeah.
But then if we start doing very clean, simple dial designs, well, then maybe we'll need to find another way to kind of razzle dazzle it a little bit.
Yeah.
And if that's case material, if it's size, if it's movements, complications, all these things are on the table. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I'm really excited about that and to see where this goes. And James, I can't thank you enough for giving me some of your time today. Where can people go find more of you or stay in the loop on what you're doing with Black Badger and with Arcanaut?
The easiest, my Instagram is simply at Black Badger, one word. Arcanaut is Arcanaut_watches. Watches. Shit, I should know this.
I'll link it down below.
Oh, yeah, exactly. I'm so bad at this. The Arcanaut web shop, we're updating as we go, especially with the Fordite series, because basically I would make a small batch of these. I've got 7 that I just finished over the last little bit that I'm sending off to Anders in Copenhagen tomorrow. And then those will pop up on the web shop. So definitely what you want to do is jump on the email list, because you sort of get a bit of a heads up before things go very public. So if there's something really specific that you're kind of jonesing for, that's the way to do it.
Yeah. All right, excellent. Well, you heard it there, James. Thank you again for your time today. It's just been a huge pleasure to chat with you as always.
Thank you very much. I hope it made some small semblance of sense.
No, absolutely, absolutely. All right, that is our episode for today. Thank you so much for tuning in, and until next time, take care.